Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 245, PhD students and PhD students in poverty. Remarkable topic. Let me tell you how we got here. And this topic emerged during a 20-hour period. Let me tell you about it. So we found a new friend at Flinders University in the Office of Graduate Research through this COVID year. And we've had the privilege of working with Elaine. Hi Elaine, from British Columbia. And Elaine commented on a statement I made in one of our professional development vlogs. And in fact, I think it was a phrase I used with a manager at some point in an earlier age of my career. But I said to this particular manager, when some bad stuff had happened, I simply replied, I have a right to earn a living. I have a right to earn a living. And I believe I recalibrated that for you in one of those professional development sessions where I said, you have a right to earn a living. You have a right to earn a living. And Elaine said when I made that statement, she burst into tears. An unusual response. I have many responses in this vlog. Tears are probably not always welcome, but in this case they probably were, because Elaine said for the first time someone acknowledged the importance of money, of earning a living, being in work, and the poverty that is confronted by PhD students. Okay, so great moment. Thank you, Elaine. Wonderful. Cut to the next morning, and I'm in my office. And I'm having a one-on-one conversation, as I do in my office, with one of our magnificent students. Let's call her M. Hi, M. And we talked about the usual topics that students talk about with their dean in my office. So we talked about supervision, we talked about time management, we talked about feedback, we talked about expectations and assumptions. These are what happens when we have our conversations in my office. And that's pretty normal, that's what we talk about. But then something extraordinary emerged in this conversation with M, where M said to me, quote, "No one seems to care that I'm in poverty. I've lived this way for so long. I just can't do it anymore. This is a deal breaker for me." End of quote. So within less than a day, 20 hours, two students talked about being a PhD student and a PhD student in poverty. I asked them both if doing a vlog might create some awareness, some consciousness, give them options and alternatives, and they both said yes. So for Elaine and for M, this one is for you. This one is for you, and I promise you, as I promised you both at the time, that I'll also make sure there is a supervisory professional development session about PhD students and poverty. So what's occurring to make the poverty matter so invisible in international degrees? Let me tell you what I think is happening. We've got a lot of attention in doctoral education, really for the last 5 years, on mental health. And that is welcome, okay? And the mental health concerns and figures in doctoral education are stunning and disturbing and horrendous. But with all the talk about mental health and using it sort of as a label, like what is going on, mental health, by using mental health in that way, we're not talking about the causes, the triggers, and indeed the context for mental health. Because within that phrase or label, mental health, there are thousands upon thousands of bespoke, different issues that we're not talking about. And one of those issues that's being sort of lost in the discussion of mental health is students in poverty. And really the further focus of my vlog today is what's called the poverty class. So PhD students from the poverty class. That phrase poverty class is particularly used in North America, but it's a welcome series of debates for us to think about today. it is a confronting phrase, and I think that is a good thing. So yes, we're looking at poverty in the PhD today, but I also wanted to take one more step, colleagues, and answer, if I can, Elaine and Em's question. And it's an empowering question. Why don't PhD supervisors understand poverty? I'll try and answer that question for you. Now, I recognise, and I've based my life and career on the fact that experience and expertise are two different things. So identity is not politics. Identity is not disciplinary expertise. Identity is not supervisory excellence. But I also remember a powerful phrase that was used a couple of weeks ago by one of our PhD students, Dennis. Hello, Dennis. And Dennis used this phrase with me, and it was so evocative I wrote it down. And Dennis described, quote, the hidden injuries of class. End of quote. The hidden injuries of class. So I want to reveal some of those injuries in the vlog today, so it's hidden no more. So after a discussion of the poverty class and the PhD, I'm going to offer 5 areas for your consideration when selecting a supervisor. And can I say, for Elaine and Em, let's try and create a cultural or generational shift or change here for you. So I have to start, colleagues, with a really, really uncomfortable truth. And this truth comes from the history of universities. You see, universities were constructed to reinforce the power of those already in power. Our systems, our structures are geared for young, white, heterosexual men with parents, with a partner to support them through their degree and their career. And they move through the undergraduate degree and move into professions, or the clergy, or the military, or indeed in the 19th century, the work of empire. So in Cambridge, women were only able to graduate from a degree in 1948. Oxford was better. 2 women graduated in 1920. And that seems, 1920. All right, that's good. But of course we forget that Oxford was founded in 1096. And women could only graduate in 1920. So we're celebrating the centenary of women being able to graduate from Oxford this year. So, okay, so much for gender. It really is class that is the weeping wound in our universities. And remember, gender is classed, race is classed, sexuality is classed, age is classed, disability is classed. All our sociological variables manifest in a configuration of class. So universities are just not geared, they're not structured for non-middle class languages, lives, patterns of life, patterns of work, let alone financial support, okay? Sienna Leith stated that, quote, this will blow your head off, quote, universities have a long history of distancing themselves from the reality of marginalised local communities, end of quote. Astounding. So let's talk about the poverty class and why that compound noun is rarely used with precision. And that's because, as we all know, poverty is relative. Economic deprivation exists on a continuum of lack. It's not about clear-cut divisions between class and classes. Poverty shapes and frames socialisation. So what I mean by that is poverty configures the very notion of what is success, what is work, and the role and value of education in both. So poverty is often situated or configured in 2 different modes or types, and they are situational poverty and generational poverty. So situational poverty is caused by a life moment, a circumstance, or a tragedy. So that would be death, illness, divorce, a catastrophe, a natural catastrophe like a fire, So this group that has managed situational poverty maintains all the socialisation, all the beliefs they had before that catastrophic moment, okay, when their life changed. Generational poverty is different. It describes the poverty that emerges through 2 or more generations. So this generational poverty changes socialisation. It creates a different set of beliefs that configures distinctions from other groups around them, including the working class. So both these modes of poverty impact on doctoral education, but in different ways. So situational poverty, that catastrophic personal event, has a profound economic consequence, which does impact on the ability of a student to finish their degree. So this group that's had this catastrophic death, like a death of a family member, right? This group, they attrit. They do leave the program. And as we've talked about before, when a student manages a family bereavement, it's very tough to keep the connection going, to keep the PhD going, because at the end of the day, does the PhD matter when your life's been torn apart? And the answer is no. And those students do leave. Now we talk about generational poverty. Generational poverty is integral to the socialisation of that particular citizen. A set of beliefs, ideas, truths, expectations about how their life is going to pan out. Generational poverty configures a worldview, and that worldview is different from the middle class or the upper classes. So there is a complex relationship between the generational poverty and the working class, and it is a complex relationship because so many members of the working class are underemployed or no longer in work. And when that occurs beyond a generation, that's generational poverty. And where that's often created is when a one industry town loses that industry. It might be mining, or it might be, of course, car manufacture. We can think of a few examples like that, where the town or the city was geared around one industry, that industry was lost, and then generational poverty manifests. And then we start to see working class consciousness crumble into poverty class consciousness. The dignity of work transforms into the desperation to survive. So this is where the phrase poverty class has emerged. An array of remarkable scholars like Vivian Adair, remarkable scholar, who writes, and she describes herself as a poverty class scholar, she presents the differences between the working class and the poverty class. And she argues that working class identity increases the marginalisation of poor women. So what does she mean there? Well, Adair argues, that women are the boundary markers, and that's a quote, boundary markers between the working class and the poverty class. So there is a history, I think, of this marker role for women. And when I did this work a decade ago now, we used to refer to this as the feminisation of poverty. The feminisation of poverty. And what that means is most poor households were and are headed by women. Why? Well, women are paid less than men. Women dominate the caring roles between generations, and women dominate part-time work and casual work, which of course pay less, and they therefore then suffer from unpredictable working conditions and pay scales. Now, all these facts have been known for quite a while. We're talking decades. But in the last decade, what we've seen is income inequality has proliferated, and race and gender have framed and filtered this income polarity. So if you're interested in monitoring this research, and look, it is a fascinating time to be looking at this research, I really recommend the Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality, a really outstanding research centre, and they look at particular marked variables. They're interested in educational access, educational outcomes, but also working patterns, notions and understandings of success, and also social mobility. Really powerful research centre. So there is a confirmation that poverty is a state where income does not cover basic needs. Food, clothing, housing. Okay. And you'll see within this basic definition of poverty, education is not a marked variable. Okay. It's not a basic need. Okay. And of course, this is how generational poverty is created. Children in poverty reveal educational underachievement. And this narrative begins in early childhood education and then increases and manifests in primary education and secondary education or high school. And therefore, because of that, they never make it to university. Because these courageous citizens do not make it to university, their lived experience, their presence can be forgotten. Because you see, those struggles are not seen in our universities, they're invisible. Therefore, the notion of making modifications to policies or changing guidelines are not developed because the injustices are so great. We never see the poverty class in our universities, so we don't have to make modifications because we don't have to make modifications because they're not present. So when students do enter a doctoral program somehow, then the resultant stories from those students are horrifying. So Sienna Leith, in a powerful article in Inside Higher Ed in 2019, recognised what she described as, quote, my identity as a poor black mom with young children and my identity as a privileged graduate student. End of quote. So she recognised what she described as, quote, the jarring dissonance between the components of her life. So the final part of the vlog today, and thank you for hanging with me, I know this is very confronting stuff, it really is, and we need to process and think this through. But in the final part of my vlog today, I want to offer 5 points for your consideration, for all of you that somehow from the poverty class has made it into our universities, right? Or you're thinking of coming in, then these are strategies for you. But also for our students like Elaine, like Em, you are confronting troubles, finding your place in our universities, and I want to try and help you if I can. So as we all know, and I think if these vlogs have stood for anything, it has been that supervision matters a great deal. But for women, working class students, students of colour, Indigenous students, older students, students with an impairment or a disability, the supervisory selection is the difference between completing a PhD and leaving the program. It's that important. Now, there are very few qual and quant studies of students in the poverty class. We're having to read across the literature in many ways. That because so few students from the poverty class even make it into our doctoral programs, I'm having to work ahead of the literature here. But what I would say to everybody out there is you are precious. You are so precious. And let's try and make your burden a little bit lighter. 1. Select institutions that value diversity in doctoral students and also whose students are diverse. If you don't name it, you can't be it. If you don't see it, you can't be it. If you're considering a doctoral program, then you know what? I never thought I'd say this, but look at the marketing materials that emerge from universities. You're thinking of a university? Look at the marketing materials. Look at the vision statements. Look at the strategic plans. Look at what universities are saying about themselves, even their aspirational selves. Similarly, look at the Dean of Graduate Research, someone who is running graduate students. Look at that Dean role. Who are they? Who are they? And who works for them? What does the Dean value? Now that matters because the Dean, for their term, however long they're at a university, determine what policies are developed, what policies are not developed, what is a priority for this group of students in our universities. So if the university is too wedded to metrics and money at the cost of people and diversity, then you know that that is not the place for you. You need to hear the word diversity. It needs to be spoken. You need to see how diversity operates through the policy suite. So do your homework. If you see no one that looks like you, no one that talks like you, and the word class is just not spoken, so the word class is just not used, then that university is not welcoming of difference. Full stop. Because if we don't speak of class, of disability, of sexuality, of impairment, of age, then we're reinforcing heterosexism, xenophobia, ageism, ableism. We need to speak the difference to create the difference. So look at those vision statements, the strategic plans, the policies. See what is meaningful and valued in that university. 2, get to know the whole person that is your supervisor. Now, the selection of university is incredibly important, tick. But before you decide on the university, the selection of supervisor for you is absolutely everything. Now, when I was writing this particular tip up, I was quite torn about this one, and let me tell you why. Because you know I believe passionately and strongly in the separation of a professional life and a personal life, okay? So personal and professional responsibilities are very different things, and they should be separated. Now, I believe that. But you are a whole person. You are a whole person. You are more than just a student. But you know what? Your supervisor is more than a supervisor. They're a whole person too. So your whole person, your life, your experience, your family does need to meet your supervisor's whole person, their family, their life, their experiences, their values. And this is where I'm torn, because certainly professional relationships are crucial. But their life experience has a profound role in how they understand your life and the profound struggles that you manage every day. You need to know that your supervisor as a person values you as a person. And one of the great and inspirational people in my life, the great scholar Howard Zinn, offers a great corrective for me with my professional, personal thing. And he does offer that reminder to me when I get a bit weird on that. He was an incredible historian, incredible scholar, and transformed our understandings of citizenship and history. And he believed, and he was right, he believed that he was a better teacher, he was a better researcher, because he was fully human to his students. He was fully human to the people who read his books. A complete person, as much as a scholar. So if the person you are considering has lived a life completely differently from you, so that there's no connection between you at all, no place to commence that conversation, then you need to take that on board. My conversation with M captured this exact problem. The different lives that have been lived by M and her supervisors meant that there was just no way to build a bridge, because knowledge is always located in context. And PhD students always have a history. Gunther Kress stated that the wider the social differences, the harder it was to communicate. Right. So therefore, the foundation of good supervision is communication. So you can see the problem. So the supervisor's life story in and out of education, and your life story in and out of education matters. And your capacity to communicate honestly about those matters is everything. So find out about your supervisor before you enrol. Have a conversation with them as a person rather than a supervisor. 3, here's a proxy for you. Look at the students that have graduated from your prospective supervisor. A great proxy to see how your supervisors or advisors engage with poverty class students and bring them success is to look at their track record of success in bringing those students to graduation. So their life history is seriously important, but the proxy for the capacity of the supervisor to use that experience, their life history, to enable the success of others is even more important. So if all their successful students are young men or young women like their former selves, so if that's the students they bring to success, then learn from that. Learn from that. The best supervisors not only respect difference, respect diversity, they welcome difference. They actively recruit students that subvert the narrative of the history of higher education success. If their graduating students are diverse, then that is a proxy for their expertise, their andragogy, their supervisory ability. Anyone, actually, can supervise a student who's had a great life history, went to great schools, had great teachers, worked their way through, went straight from school to university, went through honours, fantastic, did capstone, plenty of money, had books in the home. Anybody can supervise those students to success. That's great. But for those supervisors who recognise the power and the passion and the value of opening our doors in our universities just that little bit wiser, respect that supervisor. 4, wow, this one is important. Find friends and honour them. When poverty class citizens move through education, they lose a great deal in their passageway through to social mobility. So when people gain social mobility, they also lose a lot. They lose their relationships and they lose their connection with what they used to know. You see, we're all literate in our own lives, and it is challenging and it is confronting to move into a context in which you are not literate. When you find that place so different, the language, the rubrics of success, the very understanding of how a day operates is different. The literature focuses on the incredible isolation of PhD students from the poverty class. Their life just doesn't align with the structures of higher education and indeed a doctoral program. But find friends, find your like, share those experiences. So your isolation will be reduced by reaching out beyond your lab, beyond your discipline. So find your community, and they will create new contexts, and they'll understand your struggles, your journeys, and they'll translate your life into a new place, into a new time. 5, with respect to my wonderful 90-year-old mother who gave me this phrase, education gives you choices. Good on you, Doris. With all the battles that you've had to fight in your daily life, to use the quote that commenced my conversation with Elaine and indeed commenced this vlog, you have a right to make a living. You have a right to make a living. Now, Karl Marx worked through the definition of class through the relationship with the means of production. So what does that mean? Well, capitalists owned factories and workers could only sell their labour power to the capitalists to work in the factories, right? So that's a freedom. That's the freedom of selling your labour power, right? But Karl Marx talked about a double freedom. So let me tell you about this double freedom. We only have our power to sell our labour. That's the first freedom. We sell our labour. But there is a second freedom. We have the capacity to sell our labour to anyone. Okay. Now, what education does is it gives you choices about who you can sell your labour power to. And a PhD gives you those choices on steroids. Now, I'm not from the poverty class. I'm from a pretty safe, traditional, skilled, working class environment. That's where I come from. My father was a carpenter, as he said, Jesus was a carpenter. My father was a carpenter, my mum worked in a shop, and neither of them had one day out of work. So they worked every day of their lives. Remarkable. Brilliant people. Worked hard, fantastic people, right? And they taught me the value of hard work and working hard. But of course they taught me that, and they offered me great emotional support and so forth, but of course they had no understanding of education. Neither of them finished high school, neither of them certainly went to university. So they could offer me emotional support, but there was nothing else. There was nothing else, because every dollar I've earned, and at my age, what am I? I'm 51. At my age, this gave me a lot of pride to write this, but every dollar I've ever earned, I've earned. Every one of those dollars is marinated in sweat and blood and horror and humiliation and shame, but survival. And what I know for sure is I would have had no success in my life if I hadn't had the opportunity to have an education. This PhD gave me a life. Gave me a life. I would be nothing without that PhD. And when I went into that PhD program, I didn't have a plan B. There was no plan B. And there were no parents to bail me out, to go, oh, no parents to bail me out, no husband or partner to make it easier, nothing, nothing. There was no plan B. But I've been able to make a living. I've been able to make a good living. It's now your turn. It's now your turn. So while very few academics come from the poverty class to be able to support you enough, so we haven't got the academic staff that have come from the poverty class that can then support you in authentic ways. I know that, and that's to our shame. That's to our shame. But the working class students that made it through can help you. They can provide you with space, with some rubrics to help you translate your life and your consciousness, and can help provide a vocabulary for your success. You've had a tough pathway through higher education, and you deserve incredible acknowledgement and support for everything you've done and everything you will do. But you're now in doctoral education, and so I hope those 5 topics or ideas or pivots that I've discussed today might enable your choices, and if nothing else, might renew a conversation with your supervisor in languages that you both share. And the final point I would make to you is remember that the universities in which you are studying right now are very, very unstable. International higher education is profoundly unstable. It's an unstable workplace, and casualised work dominates and will dominate our universities for the foreseeable future. But one consequence of that casual work is that casual work is available. So you will be able to make a living. I wish you love light and peace. Tea out.